Roll A, take A.
Hello and welcome to this special talk show edition of the Newsfeed. I'm your host, Lauren Fair. Today we're discussing a hot topic that has sparked divisive conversations, paying NCAA athletes. I have two guests with me today. Billy Ray Mitchell is a senior here at Virginia Tech. He's a former offensive lineman for the Hokies and now works with recruitment for the team. We also have Andrew Allegretta, Assistant Director of Broadcasting with Hokie Sports. Andrew is the Director of Broadcasting for Digital Media and Olympic Sports and serves as the sideline reporter and football pregame, postgame host in the Virginia Tech IMG Sports Network. He works with other Hokie sports, including men and women's basketball and baseball. So you both have worked very extensively with collegiate sports and with collegiate athletes. And we have a former collegiate athlete here as well. So I want to hear what your opinion is on the topic of paying student athletes. So what do you think? Should student athletes be paid?
Well, first off, I just wanted to say that, just preface this and say that Virginia Tech has given me incredible opportunities to pursue and open doors that I normally wouldn't have had open for myself if I didn't play collegiate sports. It's been the best 4 years of my life, and you know, I've done incredible things and matured incredibly through my 4 years. But I do feel like this conversation has really taken off in the last couple months, in the last couple years, and it's a discussion that has to be had. I don't want this to come off as a, feeling entitled or taken advantage of. I just feel like with the times changing and the way things are going and how much money is being made in this field, that a discussion should be had on whether we should change it or tweak it a little bit.
Andrew, you keep a close eye on collegiate athletes and the work that you do, so what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'll say first off, I appreciate Billy's answer to start things off, because this conversation nationally, I think, has kind of been reduced to a very simple yes or no, or collegiate athletes are wildly undervalued or completely taken advantage of, and I don't think that's the case. So the fact that you started off there is a good starting point, because collegiate athletes do get a lot of things that the regular student body doesn't get the opportunity to do. They get, whether it's meals when the team is traveling, whether it's gear, whether it's the opportunity to attend, whatever it happens to be. They get a lot of opportunities that people don't. So that's a good starting point in recognizing that. I think is really nice. Having said that, there is, like Billy said, a lot of money thrown around here. So in some form, the system does need to change, because there's not only opportunities that student athletes get that others don't, but there's opportunities that they don't get that others do because of the system.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned a little bit about the opportunities that student athletes have, right, and the things that they get to experience. Mm-hmm. So how about scholarship money and other accommodations, some of which that you mentioned? Would you say that that's a proper compensation, or should we continue the discussion with monetary compensation?
Well, you made a great point in talking about some opportunities that athletes don't get to necessarily chase being a student athlete. So, opportunities like, for example, while I've been here, I haven't been able to study abroad. Football obviously is a full year commitment. I haven't been able to get a job outside. Internships, you're kind of...
Because of time commitments.
Because of time commitments. And I wouldn't change it. I'm just saying that's what comes with the territory. Internships, things of that nature. But necessarily, I would say, you kind of got to weigh it, because not a lot of people get to experience being in the locker room or being on the field at Bristol Motor Speedway. Not a lot of people get to learn the lessons that football or soccer or basketball teach you as a person, getting to how to deal with people of different walks, different religions, different creeds. You learn a lot from the game, and you learn a lot from the experiences that come with playing the game. So it's not, like you said, it's not a yes or a no answer. It's just kind of finding a middle ground where it feels like there is no, nobody's really getting the short end of the stick.
All right, you asked about scholarships. Let's start with this, though. Billy, do you like cream cheese on your bagel?
I do. I think if you put butter on your bagel, you're kind of weird.
Okay, I agree with that, all of that. But the problem is, the minute that you, at least it used to be this way, put cream cheese on your bagel, all of a sudden, that is a no-no according to the NCAA, depending on what time of day you eat that bagel. You know that used to be a thing? Right?
I did not.
At one point in time, you couldn't put cream cheese on your bagel if you wanted it to count as something other than a meal. So if it's 3 o'clock and you wanted a bagel with cream cheese, Virginia Tech couldn't provide that to you as a student athlete. At noon, yes. At dinner time, yes. At 3, No, because it's a meal. So when we talk about the stuff that student athletes have to kind of narrowly contain themselves within, it's that sort of nonsense that we have to put up with. But you asked about scholarship. Is that fair compensation? And the question isn't blanket yes or no. It depends on the student athlete. With all due respect, for a tennis player, it very well may be perfectly adequate compensation. For a star football player, it may come up woefully short.
So how do we make the distinctions between the different positions from someone who's playing tennis perhaps and then someone who's a quarterback for the football team? How are we going to determine which position, which athlete is going to have that kind of compensation?
Well, I mean, you made a great point. You have to look at it from, there are the two biggest revenue-generating teams would be football and basketball. I mean, is there a debate there? But you have to find a middle ground where should, I guess, a bench football player make as much as the star quarterback? Or, in the way I think that you can kind of start this conversation is maybe having a base, check that everybody across the university is able to receive for what they're doing, whether, I don't know what the number can be.
Cost of attendance.
Right,
That's what
so
they
cost
tried
of
to do with
attendance.
Cost of attendance.
But then trying to remove restrictions from, for example, your jersey being sold, or like in the college basketball, they have the shoe deal issue. Because a lot of athletes, whether they get hurt or don't have the opportunity to become a professional, when you sign to be an amateur, you may never have the status or the ability to take advantage of who you've built yourself to become with your fame, with your performance. And not that the university doesn't have a huge part of that, they do. But you may never have the opportunity to capitalize on the opportunity and the voice you may have to monetize it at that time.
Here's why going beyond scholarships and opening up the opportunity for certain student athletes to financially capitalize on their abilities is important. Because, in all frankness, without Michael Vick, Virginia Tech's enrollment is probably not 33,000. Or without, take your pick, whether it's D'Angelo Hall, Kevin Jones, come down on the line. Frank Beamer obviously has much to do about that, bringing those student athletes here. But if it wasn't for their skill set, Lane Stadium doesn't look like what Lane Stadium looks like at the moment. Castle Coliseum, as they continue to renovate that, English Field, as they continue to renovate that, all of these things that have grown don't look like they do, not only on the athletic side, but you can push it over to the academic side. And that's frustrating, I think, for people on the academic side to think about and hear, knowing that the enrollment and growth of a university can depend on the success of a football team or basketball team. And while it's not 100% of it, it's got a big important piece to it. So if Michael Vick helped revolutionize this university and he helped drive the revenues of this university higher and higher and higher, why isn't he in some form, I hate to use the word, but entitled to some compensation for it?
Right. And I'm glad that you bring this up because I want us to be able to discuss revenue and how athletes contribute to that at the different schools and how different schools kind of differ in the way that they can compensate athletes. But we're going to take a quick break. Up next, you'll hear more from our guests about the topic of paying NCAA athletes. You'll also hear from Virginia Tech students about what they think on the matter. We'll be right back.
Hey, let's check out this park. Oh, wow, that's really cool.
To find a great local park or forest near you, go to discovertheforest.org.
Hello and welcome back to this special talk show edition of the Newsfeed. I'm your host, Lauren Farah. Today we are discussing the topic of paying NCAA athletes. I have two guests joining me, former offensive lineman and recruitment team member Billy Ray Mitchell and Assistant Director of Broadcasting with Hokie Sports, Andrew Allegretta. Different schools have different amounts of funding available to the athletic programs. As of 2016, about 27 schools made over $100 million in revenue across all sports in college. Some of the schools on the list include Notre Dame, Tennessee, and Auburn. LSU, Michigan, and Oklahoma made the list as well. At the top of the list are Texas, Ohio State, and Alabama, all powerhouse football schools. Alabama brings in about $99 million over 3 years from the football program alone. Texas tops the list at about $182.1 million overall. Virginia Tech brought in about $84 million overall in 2016. So we're discussing how different programs, different athletic programs, how they're different in size and different in revenue and what they bring in. So if college athletes were to be compensated, whether it's monetary compensated, some of the things that we've talked about, how would that affect recruitment? How would smaller programs still be able to bring in really good athletes if that was the case?
They wouldn't. They wouldn't. If you're going to push it that far, schools like Radford, schools like East Tennessee State, schools like Wofford, take your pick, they're going to get clobbered. It's going to be game over for those smaller schools. So part of the hesitation, Billy, to completely open this up is schools like Radford, like Wofford, like East Tennessee State. It's going to be game over because of the numbers you just showed. Now, what it's worth pointing out about those numbers is the fact that Virginia Tech did bring in $85 million in the past year or so per year, right? But it also spent $85 million. That's why English Field looks like it does. That's why there's a new oasis for student athletes to go and get a smoothie effectively whenever they want. So student athletes have a lot of money put back into them, but if you're going to completely open up the floodgates, you're going to see those smaller schools basically put off the map, and you could see the NCAA basically be reduced to the 65 Power 5 schools.
I would say this. The only reason that I'm hesitant to say that these smaller schools wouldn't benefit is it's not going to change the fact that each school is allowed a certain amount of players to be on scholarship at a given time. So I don't think players will just be chasing money. If every player is able to make some type of sum of money and be able to capitalize on their image or capitalize on their profile, athletes will still be looking for the best opportunity to play. Athletes will still be looking for the best fit for them. As long as everybody's making money and having the opportunity to possibly get to the next level, even though that's only 2% of athletes who are able to play professionally, I think those other schools will still be able to make a splash and get some great players.
Right. It's not so much about the student athletes because there's enough athletes out there to
Right.
go around that whether or not they're going to get a check from Alabama, Ohio State, or wherever, they'll still want to play college sports. What ends up, I think, probably happening is the money gets even bigger and bigger and bigger that institutionally Radford can't support it. So a couple of days ago, Eastern Michigan has to cut 4 sports, right? They cut swimming and diving, they cut wrestling, they cut softball, and there's a 4th in there I can't remember, but now it's a big deal at Eastern Michigan, but financially they're doing exactly what they need to do,
Right.
which is horrible from a student athlete standpoint, right? But budgetarily, getting down from 21 to 17 sports is an absolute necessity because they just flat out can't keep up with the numbers that we saw up there.
Very true.
That Texas is 182, Virginia Tech is 84, Alabama's football program is 99. What's Eastern Michigan going to do?
Right.
So those, from a budget standpoint, are going to get clobbered.
Absolutely.
So this is where the conversation is so nuanced, so complex. It's hard to really just say yes, pay them, no, don't pay them. You've got to break it down and understand what your priorities are, what your values are. Are you going to just let it fly and let the biggest programs do whatever they want? Do you want to try to keep some sort of athletic balance between all of these programs? You've got to sort out all of those issues before you can say yes or no to just flat out paying athletes.
2 more points I want to make real quick. The way that a lot of this works as well is if you make a bowl game or if you make March Madness. I mean, for this year in March Madness, $857 million is being brought in from the Turner Company on just the television deal. That's not including radio. That's not including the billions of dollars that are spent on betting for it. So there's a lot of money made if you're able to get to a bowl game, get to the NCAA tournament, and things of that nature. And also, I believe if you're paying players feel like they're being compensated for what they're receiving, you have all this going around where money's being passed under the table, and we all know that stuff like that does go on. I feel like this would help eliminate that kind of business going around to where the student athlete is actually able to choose, okay, I like this school better, not my family's in a dire situation, and this is in every case, but in some cases. And if your family is in a dire situation and schools are throwing big money around, I mean, it's a slippery slope. So.
Okay, and we're talking, so we have the ground set here for different programs and how that would work, but what about different positions? So would a female volleyball player for Virginia Tech be paid the same amount as a football player? Or would, a tennis player be, how would that be determined?
I think that, like I said before, I think, and this is just me, I mean, I don't have all the, I don't have this completely thought out, but I feel like a kind of a base salary, I guess. I don't like to say salary, but at the same time, I feel like student athletes are kind of employees of the school. I mean, they're generating income for the school. They're working for the school. They're, I would say one of the biggest ambassadors for the school. Like you said, when you think of Virginia Tech, you think of Bruce Smith, you think of Michael Vick. When you think of LSU, you think of Tyrann Mathieu, you think of Eric Reed.
Jamarcus Russell.
Yeah, Jamarcus Russell. So I feel like that's the way to do it. But I guess to sum everything up, the right answer is not to pay not for anybody to get paid. I feel like we can all agree on that. That the correct answer isn't just to say, oh well, it's impossible. There's just too much money being brought in for there to be no way to compensate anybody.
I would say they probably don't need to be paid directly by the university. I would say you can get compensated for your likeness. So if Josh Jackson can go out there and sign an autograph for $100, let him have it. If Billy Ray Mitchell can go out there and sign a jersey for $5, let him have it.
Damn, only $5? $5?
I'll pay you 10.
I think Andy would give me 15
A
or
little
20.
more than that.
I think you should basically be able to capitalize on your image and your likeness from a marketing standpoint. That's probably the most simplistic way to go about it, because with all due respect, once again, the tennis player is not going to get the same as a football player or a basketball player, and that's fine. That's life and that's capitalism.
Right.
So that's probably the simplest way to just approach it.
And I'm glad that we can hear from you guys about what you have to say about that. I want to hear about what Virginia Tech students have to say of that. So let's go to the Virginia Tech's own Squires Student Center to see what students think about paying student athletes.
I don't think a student athlete should be paid.
I think they should.
I would say no.
I do think they should be paid.
I personally don't think that they should be paid.
Well, I think they should definitely be paid.
I think they should not be paid.
I do not believe that student athletes should be paid.
Because since we are a public university, I think it would be unfair to fund athletes versus non-athletes.
It's like they take so much time out of their day to where they got to adjust their schedule to fit practice in. They got to do practice and they got to go ahead and do work along with that.
Because student athletes sign up for that commitment just as any other student signs up for any other club or organization that they are a part of. They're fully free to sign up for that. And many student athletes do receive some form of compensation by way of scholarship or from the team itself.
Because the amount of work that they put into the sports, as well as the time commitment, I feel like that's important to take into consideration.
Because playing sports it's not a job yet. I feel like we're students first, and all students are getting paid, so I don't understand why they should get paid just because they bring, money in for like games and such.
NCAA makes enough money already that students bring in enough money to the organization that they should receive some sort of compensation.
And then I think it brings about a great disparity in terms of the athletic departments across the country. But with respect to Texas or Alabama or Ohio State or some other programs across the country, we could never compete with them in terms of going after recruits.
Probably salary.
I think it would open up an entire can of worms that the NCAA couldn't control. Does a women's lacrosse player make the same as the star football player?
I think there should be some monetary compensation, at least proportional to how much money they bring in. They don't think they need to receive professional amounts, but there should be some sort of additional compensation.
We're going to take another short break. Coming up, we'll finish our discussion on paying NCAA athletes. We'll be right back.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. You know, but it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, you know, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
Welcome back to the special talk show edition of the Newsfeed. I'm your host, Lauren Farah. I've been discussing the topic of paying NCAA athletes with our two guests, Billy Ray Mitchell, former offensive lineman and recruitment team member, and Andrew Allegretta, Assistant Director of Broadcasting with Hokie Sports. So we've talked a little bit about different programs and the different forms of compensation that would be if the NCAA was to allow monetary compensation for athletes, for collegiate athletes. So I want to talk a little bit more about the NCAA. Do you think right now, with where we're at, with athletes not being able to be paid, not to be able to turn a profit for their product, for autographing, like you mentioned, do you think that's a problem with the NCAA controlling how its money is used?
Well, like you mentioned, I mean, when you sign to be an athlete at Virginia Tech or at any other school around the country, I mean, you have to abide by a 440-page manual. I mean, I've never read it. I've just, anytime I have a question, I ask, compliance, whether, is this okay, is that okay, is this okay? So I feel, well, all the taking advantage of your likeness, taking advantage of your image, that's all rules provided by the NCAA, which is also a 501c nonprofit organization, which is a little interesting. But I definitely think you have to look at it from, the university, like you said, some universities will struggle to pay athletes and keep the programs afloat. So I think it starts with the NCAA tweaking their rule book a little bit and finding ways that players can take advantage of the name that they build for themselves with the help of the university.
The NCAA has a lot of issues. None of them are simplistic, and none of them are easy fixes. If they can be accused of probably anything, it's one, not diving into this conversation well enough, and two, not staffing itself well enough. They've got a lot of issues when it comes to compliance, like you're talking about, because their staff is just woefully small. They can't keep up. They can't manage stuff that the FBI is getting their hands into because they just don't have the staff. Or then when they do get into it, like Carolina, all of a sudden Carolina claims that the NCAA doesn't have jurisdiction over classes, and Carolina wins. So the NCAA is getting clobbered on logistics and management right now. I'm not sure exactly what the NCAA is at fault for. Maybe not appropriating their funds well enough, maybe not staffing certain areas well enough, and probably not diving into this conversation well enough. But they've got financial interests to manage, which is understandable. So I think it's probably going to take some really brave and strong student athletes to make some larger stands to push this thing to the point where it needs to go.
Mm-hmm. And it's dense, like you mentioned. It's dense. It's a lot of information for student athletes to be able to understand. They have their own book of bylaws, and I want to bring something up from the bylaws. In the section titled Continuation of Modeling and Other Non-Athletically Related Promotional Activities After Enrollment. That in itself is a mouthful. And student athletes can't publicize their statuses as collegiate athletes to promote commercial work. Like they can't use their position to be able to make money off of something or something that they're associated with. So is that fair, or would that, if athletes were allowed to do that, do you think that that would be a fair substitute for monetary compensation?
Well, for example, I mean, when I started, when I stopped playing because I had a back injury and I took a medical disqualification immediately, I love to talk sports, so I started a podcast. And the first thing I would do was say, former Virginia Tech football player, former Assumption football player. I was using my, my image as a former football player to promote my podcast and promote my website, which also covers sports. And I wouldn't be allowed to do that if I was still a student athlete here at Virginia Tech. So I feel like that, again, is another area where that needs to be tweaked and kind of changed. Because like I said, I think from athletic perspective, a lot of people peak in college and have the best voice that they have in college. So yeah, I definitely think that's where change needs to be made.
Did anybody want to sponsor your website or podcast?
I actually got a few emails from a couple companies in Blacksburg, a couple companies back, or small businesses back at home in Westwood, where I'm from. And again, I wouldn't be able to take advantage of that without.
You could now.
I can now, yes, I can now, but I wouldn't have been able to before. And also, I'd like to say too that it's easy to point fingers at the NCAA and say they're not doing a well enough job, but this is a very difficult subject, and I feel like, you know, like you said, with the cost of attendance we get now, I think the NCAA is trending in the right direction. It's just, I feel like it can trend at a more effective and more progressive manner.
They're protecting their financial interests right now, which is understandable. I know you mentioned the fact that they're a nonprofit, but they're a business in the same way that I think the NFL has tax-exempt status, and they're clearly a business as well. So they're protecting their financial interests. Yeah, no, I'm with Billy. I think that's been kind of my basic point, that the first step probably needs to be allowing student athletes to capitalize on their image, capitalize on products that they're doing. That is a whole other thing you'd have to dive into. It would be incredibly complicated from a recruiting standpoint, because some football player is going to be recruited by Alabama, and Alabama is going to say car company X will give you $10 million for your first autograph that you sign if you come here. So handshake deals will be made. I'm not saying that won't be easy to parse through, but from a balance standpoint between how do you deal with the football player versus the soccer player, swimmer, wrestler, whatever it happens to be, that makes the most sense to me. And it's also, to me, the most fair. It's the most American sort of way to approach it from a capitalistic standpoint.
Sure. And my last question for you is, if athletes were paid, do you think that this would kind of reshape the way that athletes look at going into their career? Do you think that they would have more incentive to just bypass college and go straight into the pros if they are capable of that?
Well, that's an excellent question, because the one thing that always drives me a little bit crazy is when people like to say, you know why college sports are so much better is because they're only playing for the love of the game, or everybody is playing because they love to play the game. And I loved football, and every athlete that plays their sport, from what I understand, loves their sport and loves their teammates. I mean, when I went out and played, it was for my teammates, it was for my coaches, it was for my families, because I loved playing football. But at the same time, even though it didn't work out, I was playing to potentially reach that next level and, you know, cash in on your talent. I was playing to build a name for myself. I was playing to, you know, just continue to grow personally. So that just always drove me crazy, that it's only because of the love of the game. I do think, however, though, if you tweak the system to where players are able to take advantage of their image and take advantage of who they are and make some money off of it to stay afloat or you know, do whatever, that will encourage athletes to, you know, go to college, get that education, because it is so valuable.
Okay.
Let me ask you this question. I'm curious, from a standpoint, if we just open this up and said somebody like you or whoever could make money off your likeness, how would the other players on your team feel? What kind of problems would that create internally? Like Sam Darnold for USC is out at Los Angeles, and he could be in movies right now. Or like Matt Leinart could and was eventually in movies once he graduated. If you were a backup offensive lineman or a starting offensive lineman, you can't capitalize on your likeness, and all of a sudden you see Sam Darnold, Matt Leinart running around, being in movies, kind of taking their focus away from the football field. What kind of issues would that create within a team?
Well, you just look at it this way. I mean, when we all go into the professional world, and I have a coworker who, you know, I'm putting in the same amount of hours, I'm doing the same kind of paperwork, I'm doing everything my boss tells me, and he gets the raise and I don't. It's the real world. I mean, I may be a little bit salty on the inside that somebody who either performs better or is better looking for a movie gets that opportunity, but that's just the real world. You know, if you play better or you have a better opportunity, you should be allowed to capitalize on that as you are performing. I mean, you know, it's not about fair, it's about, you know, who are you, what do you deserve?
Right. Well, this has been a great discussion. We've brought up a lot of great points about monetary compensation, alternatives, and whatnot. Unfortunately, we are out of time. That will wrap up this special edition of the Newsfeed. A big thank you to our guests for joining us today. So with that said, thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Farah.